Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay back there? Great. Well, as you may or may not know, April is Autism Acceptance Month. And so in recognition of that, we're really honored to have with us here Greg Rosen to talk to us about neurodiversity and employment. Gregory Rosen, who has autism, is widely known for his work aimed at increasing opportunities for people with disabilities. Greg works on the Transitional Assistant and Employment Subcommittee of the Massachusetts Autism Committee, and he's worked closely with state and national legislators to get 10 bills passed aimed at increasing access and opportunities for people with disabilities, including Nikki's Law and the Blue Envelope Law. He's also worked with people throughout the country to get the Critical Autism Cares Act reinstated both in 2019 and in 2024. Greg's approach to employment for people with autism has been implemented in a variety of industries across 18 different states. And as an Eagle Scout, he also volunteers as the National Disability Policy Advisor for the Boy Scouts, where he supervises the creation of national policies to improve conditions for scouts with disabilities. Greg's work has garnered multiple honors, including a special citation, both from the Massachusetts House of Representatives and the Massachusetts Senate for his disability work. Greg has a BA and an MA in history, and he earned his MBA in 2024. And he works for a financial services company as a project coordinator. So we're really pleased to welcome Greg to Holy Cross. So, with that all.
And thank you very much, Professor Sullivan, for inviting me to come to speak here this afternoon. And so, who am I? So I'm an autism self-advocate. And so what I'm trying to do is to be able to shine a light on a lot of the issues with autism and to be able to put together a lot of the solutions. And then as Professor Sullivan highlighted, with the work I've been able to do as a national policy advisor, I'd helped to overhaul the Disability Awareness Merit Badge book. And so then now it has more current policies, and then especially ways how it's possible to work with a person with a disability, and so they can be able to become more included and to be able to reach their full potential. And then also I'd help to work to improve the toolbox, which then allows all units across the entire organization to know exactly what certain disabilities are and what are the triggers for potential incidents to happen and how to reduce them substantially, and then for them to be able to become more included. And also with the work that I've been able to do in the Massachusetts Autism Commission for the subcommittee, so I was able to work with Governor Baker and also now with Governor Healy's administration to have more bills passed to improve the very critical early interventions, or for people in the sociology and psychology who know, the ABA therapies, which help to greatly improve the level of functioning with people with autism, and then also to pass more bills for tax credits and for the critical funding for people with autism to be able to get into employment, because usually the traditional way where you apply for a job and go for an interview doesn't work at all. And also, as of a couple of weeks ago, I was recently appointed to the ARC of Massachusetts State Government Committee, so then now I was able to reach out to more critical legislators and committees to be able to expedite the process of a lot of these key government programs. And I know several people have asked me, like, what is Nikki's Law and what is the Blue Envelope Bill? Well, first up, Nikki's Law. It is a piece of legislation that if a person were to abuse a person with autism or any other disability, they would then go on a very special list, so the odds of that happening again would be greatly reduced. And as originally, the state of Massachusetts did not have such a law. And then so I was able to work with the Massachusetts legislature and also with Holy Cross alumni Dan Donahue to be able to get it passed, and it took 2 tries, but I think it was well worth it. And also for the Blue Envelope Bill, this was a piece part of police reform, because then usually if a person with autism were to be able to have a meltdown, or they would get overstimulated, and then when the police would be called, and they'd have the bright lights, or more of the sensory issues with the big booming voice, and a lot of the more direct way that they handle it, it can cause a person with autism to get overstimulated. And unfortunately, in many cases, people with autism would get horribly abused, and in some cases even killed. So then with the blue envelope bill, in case the law enforcement get called in, they can then be presented the blue envelope to self-identify as a person with autism, and then how to de-escalate the situation very quickly. And it has now gone throughout the state, and it is now being looked at in other states as well to be able to help law enforcement to have this critical training. And I've received many thanks from many law enforcement throughout the state. And then also I serve on the executive committee for several 5K walks for autism, particularly for the Autism Center in Worcester, and then also with the other events with advocates as well. And so people have asked me, what made me decide to get involved with this? It's because like people with autism are usually heavily marginalized by society, and they're excluded from church and any other public activities and other employment. And then I had experienced a lot of that myself, and even trying to get a job, I just could never get through the application and the interviewing process in so many places. So I decided I want to do something about this to improve the lives of other people with autism that have not been given the same chances that I have. And people have asked me, okay, what exactly is autism? So it is a neurobiological condition, in that it is a condition that usually affects the development of speech, social, and other skills. And then, because usually the telltale signs begin at about 18 months, when a child would not be able to speak, and then they would not have the ability to have the usual development that would happen by that time. And also, as of earlier this year, the rate of diagnosis has gone up to 1 in 36, and it is continuing to rise. And then also, people have asked me, like, what are some of the reasons why this is happening, and for the development of the diagnosis. And it's like, originally, most people had never really heard of autism, and then, because originally, it would only be given to people with a very severe case. And then originally, it was believed what is called as the refrigerator mother syndrome, where they would basically blame it on the mother not spending enough time with their children. But then that has been proven to be completely wrong. And then between the 1940s and the mid-1990s, there was a lot of trial and error. They were thinking it was a different kind of schizophrenia or some other kind of neurological imbalance. And then so there's a lot of trial and error. But then with the DSM version 4, those people involved with psychology, that was when they had the firm diagnosis for people with autism. And then it had first went through, like usually they first looked at people who are like white, and then they kept going up, and they realized it affects everybody. Then they reached out to also Latino and persons of color communities, and they have it too. So that was another big reason why it kept going up and up. And then also they discovered that the autism spectrum is a very wide spectrum. So they had people like me who were like very high and able to be independent, down to people that would need 24-hour care, and they would not be able to live independently. And so as of right now, with the current employment and financial statistics, there is between 85 to 90% unemployment and underemployment rate for a person with autism. And this has not budged that much at all from the early 1960s when they're first starting to look at these trends. And also over half of people with autism have not been able to hold a job at all in their life. And it was not from a lack of trying. And then usually people who have autism, who have been lucky enough to get a job, they're usually for positions that they are overqualified for. And what I've noticed is like people would get like an engineering degree job, or the like in-demand science job, or they would have some like even a skilled trade certification, and they would not be able to get a job, and they'd be lucky getting a part-time job back in groceries at a grocery store or for something like that. So they're like very overqualified for it. And as of right now, there's less than 5% of people with autism that have been able to get a good enough job to live independently. And also, as of last year, due to the issues with autism of not being able to get a job due to all the barriers thrown in their path, and with all the costs with social services and many of the other government entitlement programs and the such that is to people with autism, it is costing the taxpayer over $300 billion and rising. And so this definitely seems to me that this is something that needs to be addressed. And so people have asked me, why is it that the unemployment rate is so high? And the first barrier that is usually thrown a person with autism's path is the application process is way too cumbersome. So usually they would have so many steps being put into an application process, and then they would then get overwhelmed, and then they would be making mistakes, and then so the company would assume they don't want the job, or they didn't have enough preparation, or any other things like that. And then usually, if they are lucky to get to the interviewing phase, candidates are usually weeded out in 30 seconds. And it's like, usually what would happen is like the person from whichever company they would call, and then they would have like the brief interaction, and they would get overwhelmed with like, okay, who is this, what's going on? And then usually the decision would be made right then and there. And also, for the application and the interviewing process, there's a lack of accommodations in the process. There's this heavy emphasis on social questions. They're like, what is your greatest strength? What is your greatest weakness? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And that usually would weed them out as well. And also, there's insufficient collaboration between agencies and employers. And there's not been enough opportunities being given for this community. And then because of the lack of coordination with like state and federal agencies and employers, that is also causing another reason for the high unemployment rate. And also, especially, there is loopholes in the 1973 and 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act. As then especially with the Americans with Disabilities Act, it prohibited discrimination in many types of disabilities. But then there is the loophole in the federal law which says if you hire somebody with a disability, you must provide reasonable accommodations. And then the companies would assume, oh, that must cost me a lot of money. And then so then you would usually not go through that. And, okay. And so people have asked me, okay, what are some of the strategies that are working to improve employment? Is that in many companies, they're starting to have more of an alternative form of interviewing and like different strategies. As in many of the companies that are leading that way are more of like the Fortune 500 companies that have like the federal requirement that you need to hire 7% of the workforce be a person with disability or veteran status. And so there was the self-identification. So then in many cases like, they can then get more of the accommodations they would need from either the interview, either be like the screening or the in-person. And the one other avenue that I found to be very effective with the interview is use what I affectionately call the upside-down triangle approach. And I know I got to throw in a little like geometry and other things in there as well. And so instead of going into the like, oh, hi, I'm Mike, or whoever from how are we going today? And we're like, what's going on here? And then have like a couple minutes of an icebreaker so we can properly transition into the interview. And then so like strategies would be like a person with HR would ask like, oh, I've noticed on your resume you do this, like for community outreach or other things like that. And then we can have the transition time to really okay, I know who this person is. We can transition and really bring out the best. And then instead of having social questions, have a technical method of the interview. So instead of asking like the social questions, ask questions like say this job requires you to use like SAP software package, like Microsoft Office, or some other particular kind of theorem or approach. Give me a few examples of how you've been able to do this, and really go for like the technical side of things, and also be like, this job requires you to do X, prove to me you can do it, or give me an example of how you would do this. And so usually with that way, they can bring out all the strengths of the person with autism. And also to have a separate room for screening, because traditionally the traditional interviewing rooms will weed them out as well. Because with all the light stimulus and all the other noises coming back and forth, so usually be like a separate office room, and then we keep the stimulus down and such, then they're able to perform a lot better at an interview. And for some other strategies that have been proven to work is having more of the collaborations between agencies and companies. And one strategy that we are using here in Massachusetts is tapping into what is now Massability, which is originally the Massachusetts Rehabilitative Commission. They're now starting to partner with more of the companies, and so they're starting to train people with autism with in-demand fields like cybersecurity and some other IT fields as well. And then once they're able to get them trained, they can then transition them into companies that are part of the network, and it's starting to expand it that way. And then so it's proven to be very effective, and we've been able to save the taxpayers over $20 million and growing. And also, though usually this style is more like the larger company, use what is called a cohort style of screening. And so like basically with this approach, they would say, we're gonna totally get rid of the traditional interviewing process. And with carefully selected candidates, it's usually about like 10 or 20% would go through the screening because they wanna make sure they can do the job. They partner with a autism nonprofit, and they come down to the company and show them what they can do. And then that has gone, it was first started by the German software conglomerate SAP back in 2008, I believe it was. And now it's been able to go throughout many industries throughout the world. Though usually most of the companies that are going with this are financial services or technology, but now it's also going into automotive industries, the pharmaceutical industry, famously by CVS, and it is also going on into defense contractors and other industries as well. And one other strategy that I have found that's also very effective is a lot of times when they have these job fairs, there's like the traditional way, it doesn't work as either, but then we have a autism style job fair. It has proven to be very effective, and I have noticed that this has worked when they're looking to hire people with autism with like the Tennessee Valley Association and other major utilities, or is down in the South, and it's gaining steam throughout the country. So instead of the traditional way, the companies would then have a job fair specifically for people with autism, and instead of the usual process, they'd be like, okay, these are the jobs that we're looking to fill, and we're hoping to hire people with autism. And then, so then they would look at the certain kind of skills that would be required for the job. And then, so then they've been able to find a good match with that way, and it's proven to be very effective as a way to get very top talent. And also, for people with autism, what I've been pushing is very good to have a career path that would focus on a lot of their strength, especially like attention to detail, and then a love of repetition. It's like one stereotype about people with autism, oh, they all love to code. I cannot code. And so then we'd been able to get some of the people into like finance, and then also with some of the manufacturing jobs, and then to be able to go out that way as well. And it's also doing very well. Well, and one other piece of legislation that I'm very proud of we were able to pass here in Massachusetts is the disability tax credit. Because of course, one of the reasons why companies have been hesitant to hire somebody with a disability is the thing with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Even though in an overwhelming majority of time, it doesn't cost the company that much at all for reasonable accommodations. And like about 2/3 of the time, it doesn't cost the company anything. Or maybe like about 15 or 20% of the other times, maybe a little bit more, might cost a couple $100s. So with the tax credit, we've now, in the state of Massachusetts, if they hire somebody with a documented disability, they can get $5,000 taken off on their taxes for the first year you keep them hired, and for every year after you keep them hired, and get an additional $2,000 taken off on their taxes. Okay, and some of the other people have asked me like, okay, so what exactly have you been able to help to do? And so the first things that I was able to help to do, and then I was very proud to be able to do this, was I helped to improve Massability's employment program. So I got to work with Commissioner Tony Wolf, who is now a very good friend of mine. And so I've been able to help Massability to really identify career fields where they would be a very good fit, and then to be able to transition them there. And for the other barrier there for the hesitancy, because then they're also like, I've never met someone with autism, I don't know how to work with them. And so I was able to work with the state to be able to have a training program, so then they would then know how to work with somebody with autism. And so then they can overcome more of the hesitancy to hire someone with autism and to really bring out the strengths, and when there's a little bit of teaching and coaching needed to prevent incidents from happening. And also, I was able to work with a team of different self-advocates as well as legislators to be able to get the tax credit in for Massachusetts, and then we'd have to keep on defending it, because in some cases it might potentially be cut or not. So we're able to have strong support, and then that is still staying firm. And also working with Massability and then other companies, able to improve the collaboration between job seekers and employers to be able to speak about how they can overcome the barriers and to be able to improve productivity, and then how they can be able to become a great contributor to the company, and to be able to highlight the particular successes. So we're having more success there. And lastly, I developed a strategy to help to work with more companies to be able to build on the success. And so we've been able to work with not just Massability, but also the Work Without Limits program, which is started by a grant through UMass. And so now we've been able to reach out to more of the companies to be able to get more people with autism and other disabilities a job. So we're making a lot of progress. All right. Okay. Now, is there any questions for me from anybody?
Yeah, so we'll just open it up to questions now, kind of conversation with Greg.
Yes.
You mentioned how you're constantly looking to improve employment for people with autism and disability in general. How long do you think it will take until the job market kind of because the way I've seen interviews, a lot of them are strict and they won't have those rooms that you're talking about, those separate rooms. How long do you think it will take before it becomes a common practice to include those separate rooms, or they'll have a more accommodating way to interview?
Well, there's be a few answers for that. So usually if they're more in the office environment, it's not as big a deal as a lot of companies at first thought it was. Because usually a separate room would, people would assume, oh, it would have to be someone way out in the corner or something like that. Not true. Because in a lot of cases it can be just another room in just like a hallway that could usually be for like when they have like a team meeting room or something right there, just have some of the lights on the stimulus, and then that's been able to do good as well. And then also for the accommodations for the interview, and then now because we're more like a Zoom kind of environment, when we've been able to have more of the success with Zoom interviewing, so then in many cases we've been able to completely eliminate the need for in-person interviewing, and then that eliminates a lot of the stimulus as well, and it's been able to become very successful.
Awesome, thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes, sir.
You mentioned bias in the hiring process with people with autism, and I'm wondering about AI, and these algorithms are sometimes designed in ways that do create bias. Do you think AI is going to be helpful or harmful in these processes of maybe encouraging people to continue with the process or being knocked out of the process through bias?
Well, I think that artificial intelligence for that kind of thing can be a bit of like a catch-22 kind of a situation, but it will also be 50-50 as well. As in, like, artificial intelligence could be able to better identify if like the interviewer's having anxiety or stress about certain questions, so they'll be able to pick that up and they'll be able to help to change some of the processes there. But then at the same time, the artificial intelligence could then be programmed to just look for very specific things that are not be there, and then they could also then be weeded out as well.
You mentioned, I mean, obviously you've been very successful in your career, and you had mentioned at the very beginning of your talk that you had encountered some of these barriers
Oh, yes.
earlier on. I'm wondering if you can just like tell us a little bit more about kind of what you experienced that made you realize like what a huge problem this is.
Oh, yes. And because like I've been able to get like the college experience, and I was able to get other skills to be able to get a job, and then I would very regularly get all the qualifications needed to get a job in many different industries. But in the way how they would traditionally do the interview would weed me out very quickly. And then it would always be with like a, hi, I'm whoever from HR, and then I'd be like, who are you? What's going on? Because like with stuff just thrown at me like way too fast, and I'd be like very overwhelmed. And then I could tell by the way how the tone and the voice that I knew that I was going to get weeded out. And then how I'd just feel like overwhelmed whenever they'd have a lot of these other like big social questions like, oh, what is my greatest strength? I'm like, what in the world is that supposed to mean? Yeah, that could mean dozens or even hundreds of things. And then I'd just routinely get rejected. And then when they would have like other job fairs, it's like, okay, you want to get a job, come to job fair, or there. And then I was able to get a lot of leads, and I would get interviews, but I just could never get through the interview. And then it would always be the traditional like heavy emphasis on social questions. And then I was like, what is that supposed to mean? And I'd freeze up, and I'd keep running into the same barrier everywhere.
Hi, Greg. Do you feel like job organizations and different people have been receptive to these ideas of using a more technical approach about skills rather than talking about social skills? Do you feel like when you talk to them about this, people are agreeing with you and saying, yes, we should be asking about technical skills rather than social skills?
Yeah, that is a very good question, and because also what I've been noticing, not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country, there's now getting more and more demand for people with autism. And then also, there were several documentaries about very successful programs throughout the country that get onto like ABC and a lot of the major news outlets, and they would regularly tell about, okay, they couldn't get through the traditional interview, but then we're able to give like a few dozen people a chance, and then they're able to be tremendously successful. And a big example was, it was either EY or PwC. They started a pilot program at the cohort, and they hired, it was about 20 or 24 people with autism to create a recurring algorithm, and then they were able to save the company tens of millions of man hours by eliminating unnecessary repetition. And then, so then they were then helping to make a lot of the company more streamlined, and it got all of the media, and they're like, wow, people with autism can do great things. And then also how when they had a media documentary about the large initiative in North Carolina, I think it was, with CVS, is one of the senior leaders had it was either a child or a grandchild with autism, and they looked at what the employment statistics were. And then he decided to work with the company to build a program for their pharmacy drug distribution factory. And so they're able to hire a couple thousand people with autism, and they've been able to greatly streamline the process. And then so there's getting to be a lot more demand, is once people are realizing just what we can do if given a fair chance. And so we can't get in through the front door, we can get in through a side door and accomplish great things. So it is getting more and more popular now. And then with the keeping of the tax credits and more of the other funding in there, we're able to make a lot of progress. Yes. Okay, and so like there's several things that we in the autistic community that have been doing to promote awareness. Like this Saturday is when we're having the 5K for the Autism Center in Worcester. We've been able to get many arts out into the media, like what they do and about the high rates of unemployment and what the real barriers are and the solutions. And so that's been able to get a bunch of media. And then recently I was able to go to the Teamsters 25 Autism Gala in Boston. So we had people from all over the country come to there, and we were able to raise over $800,000 for autism. And then so that was able to get a bunch of good media connection. And now that Sean O'Brien, who is one of our biggest supporters, he's now the national head of the Teamsters Union, he's been pushing that throughout the entire union now. And so now they're working on other initiatives throughout the country as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you've been speaking a lot about college graduates, and I was wondering if there are also pathways for teens into sort of these employment opportunities.
And thank you for asking that question. And also here in Massachusetts, with like the Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce, they now have a program that comes out once a year, I believe it's in April, where then they can then have people of that age to come down there to really make a lot of connections in various industries and to get more of the critical leads that are needed for employment opportunities. And so that has proven to be very successful, and a few years ago they created a pilot program that has become very successful, where they have a group of people specifically designed and trained to work with people with autism to get a job. And they've been able to get several dozen people with autism hired, and the list of companies that they're working with is expanding.
So, you have a career in the financial services industry. How did you manage to kind of get in and get going, like get past these barriers?
Well, I believe in telling the truth, and it was largely by accident. When I was studying in the United Kingdom, I originally wanted to become the educator route, but then I was told that my writing is not good enough to go for a PhD and go for a university position. And then I found out, or at least, let me phrase that, it was a rumor of one person that wanted to start a company to help people with autism. His name was Mike Shaw. And so I decided to investigate. And then I found out it was true. So I got to work with him to build the Autism Spectrum Disability Educational Support company. And then we were getting it off the ground, and then had to, with the bureaucracy from London, and then the different aspects of business analysis and other parts of that of working with numbers. And I'm like, this is really cool. And so once my student visa ran out, I then began to try to do some volunteer work at the Nazareth home in Leicester. We work with abused and neglected children. And then I was able to help out the staff with some of the financial analytical problems. And then they were like, we can use you in this organization. So it was more of like a small nonprofit. And then the head of the entire organization, who I had actually known for like 12 or 14 years earlier, then offered me a position on the board of directors to help with the finances. So then I learned a lot about financial analysis and like the importance of SAP to streamline us, and then like monthly, quarterly, and yearly reports, and like with grant writing, and how to properly look at a lot of the financial analysis. And then I thought like, yeah, this is the career for me. And then I tried to get another more regular companies, and of course I'd write the same barrier. And then it took 5 people, and I will never forget their names to the day I die: Sarah Pash, Sarah Gladue, Julia Kim, Ben Hoffman, and Susan Lipinski. They then came together for me so I could be able to get a job at a much bigger company. And then it was actually those 5 who was able to actually tell me like a lot of the ways that how you can improve the interview. And I believe in giving credit to people where it's fully deserved. So it was those 5 people. And then they came to bat for me and gave me like that real, fair, honest chance. And is there any other questions from anybody? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, is there anything like we can do now as like individuals to help this initiative, or
I could probably go on for several hours. And so like first time we have the Autism Center 5K this Saturday, that'd be a great way to have there, because then a lot of the funding that we raise there goes for a lot of these programs and also for employment. And also like with the Doug Flutie Foundation, they are also huge supporters of autism, and a lot of the funding they raise there goes to a lot of these programs as well. And then to also really remind like legislators about just how high this unemployment rate is and the solutions, and to really keep it going up. Because now we're starting to make progress, and I think now is not the time to back down. And then also to really be there for people with autism, because a lot of cases they would like usually feel like they're heavily marginalized and they don't fit in. And then it can lead to all kinds of problems. So to really be there for them and really help to get things going up. So those are the really big ones. Yes, sir.
Sir, I want to ask you how you identify yourself with autism, because you seem to very capable at socializing. And I also curious, did you before knowing you have autism, you have because the outcomes are kind of subjective. Do you have specific time like credit to your inability instead of your kind of autism related issues?
Okay, and so I think what you're trying to me is, like, first off, I did not get the autism diagnosis until I was 11, and I did not start to get the interventions until I studied in the United Kingdom when I was 24, 25. But then it wasn't until I was about 30 or 31 when I truly got the real interventions that I should have got when I was 3 or 4 by the Autism Center in Worcester. And so they were able to greatly increase my level of functioning. And so I know we're supposed to talk about employment today, but to further answer your question, it's like the critical ABA therapy and other interventions is usually, if they can start those intervention therapies between 18 months to 3 years, the level of functioning goes up substantially very quickly. And then they're able to live a much more fulfilling life and then be able to be more independent. And And then it's like I've seen people were able to get the interventions before I did, and they're even higher functioning than I am. And so, because I was a bit delayed in getting the interventions, I was not able to be as functioning as I could be, but then with the Autism Center and at last getting the interventions, I was able to improve the level of my functioning.
Great, thank you for your talk. I would be interested in what advice you have on the best ways to self-advocate, both through a hiring and recruiting interviewing process, but then on the job. What strategies, what ways of self-advocating and also self-disclosing are effective, and maybe what might not be so effective.
Okay, and so I will use several examples of myself, and because like, and a lot of times like when I have my work and other things and like that, I've been able to get reasonable accommodations. So I've been able to go into like a separate part of a room to be able to work. Because then usually if there'd be like a lot of doors going back and forth and bright lights, and then get overwhelmed, or in other cases people would assume that I'm just trying to act out everything, and then out you go out the window. But then by advocating for that, I was able to get the accommodations I need to be able to work. And also what I have found out is, in many cases by self-advocating, you can be able to get accommodations for the interview, and then more companies are starting to go in that way as well. But in some cases, I found out just bluntly admitting that you have autism can have drawbacks as well, because in a lot of cases there's preconceived notions about autism, like the numerous TV shows about autism and like other movies. In a lot of cases they get it wrong, but in some cases they do get it right, like Atypical was a very good one that showed it, and of course the Sesame Street character Julia did a very good job as well. So in some cases it would be good to self-identify, but in other cases should be with a little bit of caution.
Howard, is there a way to know the right, to disclose or not disclose, or do you just have to, make your decision and see how the employer reacts in your experience?
No, from like the time when I was really trying to get in the employment sector and then till now, things have changed quite a bit for a lot of companies like in this area, and now they have more of the self-advocate, that they're like, okay, you need reasonable accommodations, we will work with you. So it has been proving to be better now to self-advocate. And then so then they're more open to the reasonable accommodations as well as part of the interviewing process.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And is there any other questions?
If there's no further questions, we will just say thank you very much, Greg, for coming and sharing your expertise, your experience, all that you have done with all of us, and calling us in this month of Autism Acceptance Month in April to stand with people with autism.
And thank you very much, Professor Sullivan, for